Breaking now in our showdown with North Korea, with Kim Jong-un now vowing to build up his country's nuclear arsenal amid new hints that the U.S. might be leaning toward military action. President Trump tweeting, quote, "Our country has been unsuccessfully dealing with North Korea for 25 years, giving billions of dollars and getting nothing. Policy didn't work." Joining us now, Meghan O'Sullivan, a Harvard professor and former Deputy National Security Advisor. She's also the author of Windfall: How the New Energy Abundance Upends Global Politics and Strengthens America's Power. So when it comes to North Korea, I was astounded to read in the Wall Street Journal the list of sanctions that are being put into place on North Korea by the U.S. Mexico, Peru, Spain, Kuwait all expelled their ambassador, the North Korean ambassadors from those countries, for instance.
Exactly. And this, I think, is a story that deserves more attention than it's getting. Obviously, the rhetoric between North Korean leader Kim Jong-un and President Trump kind of engulfs the headlines. But what's really happening, which is of great interest, is this intensifying campaign to have countries, not just the U.S., cut off economic and diplomatic ties to North Korea. So this is putting in place a sanctions regime, an isolation regime against North Koreans that is unlike anything we've seen in decades.
But because precisely that, because it is unlike anything we've seen in decades, does it stand a chance of working? I mean, does it perhaps pose the possibility that Kim Jong-un will finally be starved of the foreign currency he needs to keep that regime operating?
Well, I think it for sure will constrain the resources available to him. And so that is one goal that we know it can meet. The real question is, will it affect his calculations about his nuclear program? And this, I think the president in another tweet was, right to be skeptical that a diplomatic solution is going to offer deliverance from this particular problem immediately. But I think it's really important to keep the diplomatic option on the table, in part because it's really essential in this other campaign to get countries to cut their ties. They need to know that the United States has some kind of strategy, and preferably one which isn't all about military force. So keeping the diplomatic option on the table, not dismissing it, as the president did the past weekend with Rex Tillerson's efforts, I think is very important to culminating this economic strangulation of the North Korean regime.
But Kim Jong-un has looked at people like Muammar Gaddafi, who gave up nuclear weapons, and Kim has said, look, it didn't work for him, didn't help him. I'm going to maintain a nuclear arsenal no matter what. If that's his attitude, what chance does economic strangulation really have?
Well, I think one thing that's important to keep in mind is that economic sanctions never look like they're working until they actually produce a result. So there are many people who are very skeptical that Iran was going to negotiate with any amount of seriousness. And it was the economic pressure that really changed their politics and moved them to the negotiating table. Now, I think it would be overly optimistic to assume that any amount of economic pressure could get Kim Jong-un to simply say, I'm giving up this whole pursuit, for the reasons you suggested. This is existential to him in a lot of ways. But there are other compromises that he might make that, in combination with a strong military deterrent and a lot of other complements, could be a superior outcome to a military option, which would almost certainly run the risk of potentially hundreds of thousands of deaths in the region, if not further afield.
Well, the president certainly is keeping the U.S. press guessing when he tweets or when he mentions things like he did at that dinner for his top military leaders, said this is the calm before the storm. And when everybody pressed him for answers, he said, you'll find out. Does that kind of guesswork, does that have to apply to the North Koreans, too? I mean, are they left wondering how serious he is about military action, and is that a good thing?
Well, 2 points here. I think, one, it is important that the North Koreans think the United States is willing to use military force in some circumstances, and that's a deterrent in itself. So completely taking a military option off the table, I don't think is constructive. However, this kind of rhetoric, I think, is counterproductive, and because it frightens, potentially maybe it frightens the North Koreans, but if anything, it isolates the United States and it makes the rest of the world feel like the United States is very unpredictable. And so the focus shifts to actually North Korea encouraging the Chinese, the South Koreans to focus on talking down the Americans to make sure that something erratic or impulsive doesn't happen that's initiated by the Americans. So I would say, while I give the Trump administration high marks for really intensifying economic pressure on the North Koreans, I would say the rhetoric is actually counterproductive.
Yeah. Well, the North Koreans have threatened to launch a nuke and set it off over the Pacific.
Sure.
That is pretty destabilizing. Meghan O'Sullivan.
No, there's no question.
Yeah. It's a war of words. Let's hope that's all it is, at least for now. Meghan O'Sullivan, thank you.